All right, we are back in session. It's 6:27. That must have been extended about 10 minutes and we are back. And so next up is public comment. This is an opportunity for public comment on issues not scheduled for comment on the meeting agenda. Items on tonight's agenda that will have public comment are our budget public hearing and the first read of our GPs. Other public comment should be done now. Clearly state your name and school attendance area. Limit your comment to 2 minutes and we'll be using a timer. The board neither endorses nor censors any opinions expressed in public comment. Please keep comments civil and respectful. And then no comments or applause from the audience, but feel free to wave if you want to show support. So we do have one person in person, and then if there's anybody on Zoom, they could raise their hand. All right. So up first is Raquel Cos.
Hi, I'm Raquel Cos, and I am, I have a 22 grad at Issaquah High School, and I have a going to be junior. And actually, I met you, superintendent, on the PTSA call, so thank you. I'm not very good at public comment, so I'm nervous. So I just want to touch on two very quick things. My first one is this is my 5th year being a voice mentor. And I have 2 kiddos at 2 different schools. And I had an idea to have voice mentor be a class. I kind of came because I thought it was a budget and a thing, but I'll just continue. So here's my idea. My idea is to have it for 11th and 12th graders only, because they would need to drive. To have it either or and 1st and 7th period. So for example, an Issaquah High School's kid could leave school at 2:05 when 7th period gets out. They could then drive to their neighborhood elementary school or any assigned elementary school. They could be there at 2:20. And then they could work with that kiddo for 45 minutes, 60 minutes. And if they want to stay to the end of school at 3:45, then that's great too. I just keep hearing all summer, you know, I know there's a lot of behavior issues. I know there's a lot of teachers that would love to see a graduate. For example, we live in the Cougar Ridge area, and I know, so I would love to see, you know, older kids who are 11th and 12th graders be able to go to their neighborhood elementary school and give back. You know, they're trying to find time. Oh, shoot. Am I done? So anyway. Well, I had one more thing, shoot. So anyway, I would love to be on the committee, and if you guys want to talk about it more, but I think I would be really helpful. So anyway.
Oops, I got to get my microphone back on. That takes care of public input. I did ask about Zoom and there wasn't anyone. We are on to the approval of the consent agenda.
I move the consent agenda be approved as presented.
Second.
All right, our consent agenda is a meeting management tool that allows us to approve a number of motions all in one swoop. All board members have had the opportunity to review all the items. All those in favor of approval of the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. All right, that passes unanimously. Thank you. And then are there any changes to the regular agenda?
There are no changes to the regular agenda.
All right, then we will continue on, and it is now time for the public hearing related to the budget. And so this one's a little bit more formal. And so I will gavel us in. I now declare the public hearing open for the 2023-2024 Issaquah School District budget. And I will turn it over to our CFO, Martin Turney, to give a presentation about the budget. And then I will open it up for any comments from the public. either in the room or on Zoom.
Thank you. Martin Turney, Chief of Finance and Operations for the district. I'm joined tonight by Miranda Bancek, our Executive Director of Finance and Budget, and we'll be walking you through some slides. We also have a link on the agenda to our annual budget guide and a lengthier, more detailed actual budget document that we send to the state every year. So that's in there for additional information. Obviously, this is a culmination of a lot of work and engagement that was taken on during the course of the year. I want to thank the board, the administration team, particularly Mariah and Teresa Aarons in our office for the work they put in during the year. It's quite a bit. So what I'll do is I'll start by, Stephen, I have to aim it this way. There we go. I'd like to start by reminding us that we have our vision and mission that we keep in mind as we develop the budget. And then we also, of course, have pictures throughout of the students that we are here to serve. This slide deck will go through a brief summary of 22-23, the year that we're closing out now. We will go through a few sections of the general fund, which is that operating fund that's pretty important to how we do our operations every year. And then we'll go through some of the other funds that we have as a district to go through the revenues and expenditures there. So I want to start just as a reminder, if we've followed through the budget process this year, we've talked about this earlier, but we started the year in trying to figure out how we're going to approach our potential 23-24 budget by addressing our initial projected ending fund balance for 22-23. Throughout the year, conditions changed a bit. We actually had sustained enrollment, particularly at the elementary level, month after month. We gained students this year. So that results in additional funding. So that's something when we get our initial numbers, we can't count on because we don't know what that's going to look like until we've progressed significantly through the year. So over time, as we had our budget conversations, we included that as a variable and as we made further decisions on what to do. We also started with a much lower estimate for transportation funding this year. For our regular funding amount, that was about $4 million lower. About mid-year, we were made aware that we were going to have about $4 million more available to us, which is great. We were also able for the first time to apply for and obtain safety net transportation funding, which was good. So these things, and assuming enrollment for the students that came to us throughout the year maintains, that these are things that roll forward into our 23-24 revenue picture, and we factored into what we're looking at in terms of that budget. I'm gonna let Mariah bring us through some enrollment information here.
Thank you, Martin. So for elementary, you can see that it started around 8,180. It dipped a little bit, and then throughout the year, it steadily increased, and it went all the way up to 8,400. So overall, it was about 255 additional students in elementary that came to the district during 22-23. And then for middle school, it was remained flat during 22-23, so not any large decreases or increases. And with high school, there was a very slight decrease at the end of the year, which is it can be pretty common with families moving potentially out of state or wherever they may go, or for college and whatnot. So that was for 22-23, and now we're going to go to 23-24. So this is a summary of the budget factors. So we did have a state increase of $10.8 million. $6.1 million of that was the state increased salaries of 3.7%. And then an adjustment to the prototypical funding model of 2.2 million for counselors, nurses, social workers, psychologists. There was also an increase in the multiplier for special education revenue, so about $1.6 million. And then materials, supplies, and operating costs increased about 900,000, and that was for inflationary increase. There were some other factors into the budget for 23-24. So there was an increase in local levy revenue, about $3 million. And that is the difference from the year prior. So you have a new levy each year and it increased by 3 million. There were reductions of $9 million primarily from central administration and operations. There was a local cost of IPD, so that inflationary state increase for staff salaries. One of $3 million, that would be the local cost portion. And then we projected an enrollment decline of 210 students. That equates to about 2.4 million. And that's based on October count or year over year. There was also an increase in non-employee related costs. So that would be the materials, the supplies, contractual services of $1.7 million. And that also would have been higher if we didn't make the reductions that we did make as well. There's estimated negotiated increases above IPD of $4.6 million. So that's where you have bargaining and say you approve IPD plus a percentage. So a little bit above.
Real quickly, I also want to make sure everyone knows, we pulled out some of the significant factors. These are not, this is not an exhaustive list of the things that were in consideration or we made as a district in terms of the budget. So.
Okay, so this shows the past enrollment trend and then the projection for 23-24. So you can go through from 17-18 and see that we were about 20,522 and it fluctuated throughout the years. It had a decrease during the pandemic, typical for many districts around the state and the country. And then right now in our trend, it's showing stable, it's looking stable. And we did project based on that October count, about 210 students decrease in enrollment for this coming year. Okay, and I'm going to pass it back to Martin.
Thank you. So one thing, as we talked about increasing enrollment and potentially our projection for a slight decline, we want to also point out a new trend that we are experiencing when it comes to special education enrollment. Particularly over the last 2 years, we've increased about 11% in our special education enrollment. And of course, that comes with its own funding, but it also comes with a cost to the district because the state is not funding us entirely for those special education students. So as we see increases in this enrollment, we are also taking on a cost locally at the district. So just wanted to make sure that that was pointed out as something as a new development for our district. Going right into the general fund, kind of top level overview here. Again, if we are projecting an ending fund balance in 22-23 of $36.5 million, and we believe that we can maintain that $36.5 million, this is what that would look like. Why there are two ending fund balances on this slide are because we typically have capacity in the budget. And so when it calculates an ending fund balance, it in this case shows $20 million. We do not expect to expend the full capacity unless we have revenue attached. So again, our expectation or prediction at this point is to end with $36.5 million. I will point out that obviously as we get into the fall and we start getting new numbers for the year, these things could change. Our projections are going to be revised as we get those numbers. Currently, we are in the process of the enrollment verification process this week. We have about 37% of the anticipated respondents responded as of today. It's about a day and a half when we got that report. So that's encouraging. People are responding and getting those numbers into us. And so that's kind of the very first start of how we can look at enrollment and see what the trends are going to potentially look like coming in. So we include a look, kind of a high level look at revenues as well. So the basic takeaway from this again is that the state of Washington funds us for about 2/3. Or the revenue is about 2/3. The other 2/3 come from local sources, and then a very minimal amount from the federal government for our district. I want to point out in terms of the local levy. So we're now transitioning to something new that is different from the last couple of years. Voters last levy election allowed for a certain amount of authority, approved what they said we could collect. Then it becomes what we can legally actually collect. So when we enter 2024 as that tax collection year, it will be the first time in the recent past where we will fall under what we were actually allowed by the voters to collect. Because primarily we can no longer use in the calculation our high point of the 2019-20 enrollment numbers. So we are now shifting to our actual enrollment numbers. So we believe as we go forward, we will probably have less of a significant increase year over year in our levy collections. So we obviously will be taking a look at that and be scrutinizing that closely as we begin conversations for the 24-25 and beyond budgets. So in terms of expenditures, this would look pretty similar if you've seen our previous year view of this. Obviously, classroom and classroom support are sizable in terms of how we spend our money. One thing, and it goes in line with what we talked about earlier with special education, that's kind of jumped up in order than it was last year. It's a higher percentage now compared to the others. I did want to show this slide because it is a picture of the total budgeted special education amount of 52 million and how that's kind of sliced up between the funding sources. So right there on top, showing the local levy is funding, or at least budgeted for $17 million. That's up from about 13 the previous year. So that's significant. And that is something that we will obviously want to have ready in our minds as we talk about special education and how much our local districts are spending on special education. Federal government is a much smaller amount for us. In the previous couple of years, we've had pandemic related funding, so that number's been a little higher. It's now dipped back down because we've lost those funds. And then the state coming in around 57%. I did also include in here that it is about 28.6% of our local levy. So that gives an idea of how much of our local levy is being applied to special education. We wanted to include this as well. These are non-employee costs specifically for basic education. So one question that comes up is, how much do the districts spend in relation to what they receive from the state in terms of basic education? So we include this just to show we are spending more on these non-employee costs as well, about 12 million in this case. Okay, so this is a pretty important slide. I know I've already talked a little bit about fund balance. So I mentioned that the projected ending for 22-23 is $36.5 million. That equates to approximately 9.82% of budgeted expenditures. And in unassigned unrestricted about 5.89%. So that's within the range of the board mandated range that we need to be in. And we are projecting the same dollar amount for the end of 23-24. However, as our total budgeted expenditures grow, this is now a decreasing percentage of our budgeted expenditures. So it does fall a bit on our total fund balance, and then the unassigned unrestricted falls slightly as well, still within range. But over time, if we are to keep the exact same amount of money in our so-called bank account, it does not go as far. So I do want to mention expenditure management. We are continuing to line those expenditures to resources. It was mentioned that we made approximately $9 million of reductions in this budget. With the reductions and assuming, again, sustained enrollment, we believe we can end that flat at 23-24 and preserve that fund balance. And we are going to continue that expense management mindset for the next year and beyond. This chart just shows a little bit about what I was just talking about. The line itself is that percentage of fund balance. So you can see that it's on a decline. It's a little less dramatic in the two projected years. But the last two, the 23-24 projected, and then the line is the projected percentage of those two. So it's kind of a graphical view of what we just talked about. I do want to point out it does include a replenishment of the board reserve. So there was some use of the board reserve during the last year. So this does include that being returned. And that wraps the general fund up. I'm going to hand it back to Mariah to go through some of the other funds.
Thank you, Martin. Okay, so we have the capital projects fund. And so the majority of revenues in this fund come from the levy, the capital tech levy. You also get some, so that's about $33 million. And then you get about $1 million in investment earnings and impact fees. And then expenditures, it's dependent on the projects you have going on. We want to create a lot of capacity in this account, in this fund. So we do go ahead and budget the bulk of the available expenditures we could have, just so we do have that capacity in the budget. So the capital projects fund is used for the acquisition of school sites. It's for the construction of new schools and the renovation of existing schools. Okay, so the debt service fund, it pays for the principal interest on bonds. And these were approved by the voters to pay for new schools and for renovations. And this is so the revenues would be from the property taxes, and this fluctuates each year dependent on what bonds you have outstanding and the payment schedule. And so you gather those. This is a restricted fund. You receive those revenues, and then you pay the principal and interest in December and June every year. So the Associated Student Body Fund is a restricted fund. It's a special fund for student activities in government, athletics, clubs. And so they, every year in the spring, they complete their own, at the high school level, they complete their own club budgets and they submit those with their advisors. So all the high schools and the middle schools and the elementary, even the elementary schools complete them. So every school has a budget, and they gather those up and they send it to us, and it's a kind of an in and out, and you just want to give them a capacity in case they want to do an event or activity. They have that capacity in their budget. And so that's why you see the beginning fund balance and the ending fund balance is the same, so that a lot of times they're fundraising, they might be charging some fees, and then they're paying for those different types of events. Okay. And then the transportation fund, its purpose is to purchase buses. And we did have a transportation levy. We received the first collection in the spring and we'll receive the rest in the fall. And that's all of the money for that levy term of 4 years. And so we will be purchasing some buses. We also will receive some revenue for reimbursement of depreciation. And then we are also exploring electric buses. So we've already applied for multiple electric buses grants. We have not been approved yet, and we have one going on right now that we're trying to apply for, but we also are looking at potentially paying for it as well out of our transportation fund.
So we've, onto the next slide. This is something that we've provided annually within the guide and last year on one of our slides. This is a comparison of administrative costs. It kind of shows the last actuals that we can get are from financial statements, so it's a couple years behind. And then we show a comparison with our 23-24 budget. One item that I just want to point out, we made an accounting change for activity 61 down there at the bottom. As we made reductions, we had staff assigned to activity 62 and 63, which are facilities and custodial. And so what we did was we consolidated those into one activity as we had a decline in the number of staff. So what looks like an increase really is an accounting change that we had those staff allocated in other areas. And of course, that would show an increase there. So that pretty much concludes the numbers portion. I wanted to also mention next steps. The next meeting is the meeting where we will bring you the resolution for official adoption. That will include just a high level revenue expenditure amount by fund. It will also mention the excess levy rollback amount, which is slightly different than the year before because we're now in this new condition. And then we will bring a 4-year financial forecast that is required as part of the resolution itself. If anybody's curious, we have additional information on the website. There's a link from the agenda, and it includes a couple of the items that were attached to this agenda tonight. So we do have an appendices with some additional information on how the fund balance will be broken out, and then a little bit more detail on the ancillary funds that beyond the general fund. So if that's of interest to anybody, they can explore that. So are there any questions for us?
All right, well, I think first we'll go ahead and see if there's any public input and take care of the public hearing part of this, and then I'll open it up to the board for any questions. So don't leave. All right, so this is an opportunity for anyone in the listening audience in the room or in Zoom to provide input. Would anyone like to provide input? I'll say it again. Is there anybody in the room or on Zoom that would like to provide input? And going a third time, is there anyone in the room or on Zoom that would like to provide input? All right. Then I now declare the public hearing on the 23-24 Issaquah School District budget closed, and I call the regular board meeting back to order. All right, so now I will open it up to the board if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make. I'll start with one. I thought it was, it is interesting, and I'm glad you explained how even though we had gone out to our voters and they authorized a levy of, I think it was $64 million for this year, that we had a great debate about what number to set that out at. And we had created capacity in case like the legislature allowed us to continue using a higher enrollment number or whatever we could have. But now where the answer is, we can only collect about 60 million, The rest of that is the rollback, and that's how it works. I just like to point that out because there was a lot of debate about, if we set it at 64 million, would we collect it anyway? And that's not how it works. We collect what we're legally authorized to collect, and that is a formula that comes from the state, and that's what we follow. So there's that. And then I also thought it was interesting. I think you mentioned on there, our levy only increased by $3 million from the prior year, but our local IPD expense for our local people that aren't covered by the state increase in IPD was also 3 million, right? So right there, that's all the capacity we had in that increase of the levy. And so it just goes to show there's more and more pressure on the use of the levy dollars. And that is going to be a challenge as we move forward. You talked about special education and the increased use of our levy dollars for that. We appreciate how the state made changes to the funding for special education. We appreciate that and we thank them for that, but they still have a long ways to go to fully fund special education so that we can use more of our levy dollars for other local things that we would like to do. Those are a couple of things I noticed. Director Weaver.
So as we look at the fund balance trend, which, has a nice steady downward slope, which is not necessarily a good thing. I am assuming that those peak years in 2018, 19, 20, 19, 20 included some reserves for the opening of new schools.
Yes, I believe there was, that was timed about when we were opening some schools as well.
Yeah, and I just, again, sort of talking to the public here, wanted to point that out because it's important that the fund balance is an indication of our solvency, but it also includes some one-time items so that if we see a big drop from one year to the next, it isn't necessarily a bad thing. But I assume that that downward trend in the percentage of our budget could maybe at some future time have an impact on our bond ratings?
Yes, absolutely. And we are hearing that the rating agencies are looking at school districts a little differently than they have in the past as well. So when they're looking at our fund balance and if it's on a decline, then they will factor that in. So
Yeah, so again, I think it's important that I don't think anybody sitting here has any concerns about our school district solvency, but at a certain point, as those numbers change, we do have to look at the cost of our borrow.
And this is referring to slide 19 on the PowerPoint PDF deck, just for public reference.
Director Moraldo.
I'd say for me, actually, what was the biggest surprise that I wasn't expecting was the increase in the number of special ed students we've had over the past 2 years. An 11% increase is pretty significant. And so it goes back to the legislature continues to do things that haven't really helped us, but I'm wondering how much closer does that get us to that a cap, an increase in the cap would be more likely to impact us if we have more students who are on IEPs.
oh, that's a great question. I believe we're in the 10% right now, where the cap was at 13. So we are getting closer. And if the trend continues, we will be bumping up against that number. Yeah.
But the way special ed, well, I don't even begin to understand the way special ed funding works. I'll start there. But as we get more special ed students, I'm presuming that the inadequate revenue from the state does go up proportionately.
Correct. There is additional funding with each student.
Right. But then of course, the local
It's still
share,
not enough.
Yeah.
it's still not enough. So the
Right.
local share coming out of the levy also goes up, right? And of
Correct.
course, our levy dollars are fixed based on a formula as far as how much we can collect, because it's a per student collection.
That's correct.
Right, so if there's a gap already between what
Yeah.
the state and federal government spend and what we come out of local levies, every student increases that gap. And I'm trying to remember, I thought last year we were looking at 13 million coming out of local levies. Am I misremembering? Maybe is that a couple of years old?
Nope, that is absolutely correct.
So that's a $4 million increase, 1 year increase in expenditure. So
Mhm.
it again wipes out what we might have been looking at. Well, it's an additional cost that we don't have any type of real increase in funding from the state or from the federal government. And it really is when federal government is down to 9.3%. That's abysmal.
Mhm.
You know, they talk about, it was supposed to be 40% when IDEA was first passed. And it just shows how we are impacted in a way that I need to get a better understanding of, because they'll say that, well, the federal government's funding at approximately 14%. I think it got up as high as 17% one year since I've been on the board. But if they're funding overall at maybe 13, 14%, but we're receiving less than 10, I have some questions about that.
Sure.
And I think I'm going to have to do some figuring of how does that money actually get from the federal government into our coffers? So I might want to get some time to meet with your staff to figure that out, because I think that's some federal legislative advocacy that needs to happen.
That could be a good part of your next January, where you go to the advocacy work that's done at the federal level over the funding. And of course, this slide is great to take both to the federal government and to the state,
Right.
as far as the needed expenditures, because we want to be supporting our special education students, but we need the state and the federal government to step up to funding this. Because as I said before, our local levy dollars are capped the way they are, and the pressure on the things that we need to do with our local levy dollar is only increasing.
And not to mention the fact that technically, legally, our levy dollars aren't supposed to be paying for basic education, which special
Correct.
ed is. Yes. But somehow the powers that be kind of overlook that because every district in the state is doing it.
We didn't win that lawsuit.
No, we didn't,
No, we
but we
didn't.
tried. Is there anything on the increasing trend of students that are identified as special education? And that you may not be the right person to be answering that. I recognize
White
that.
screens in the
Wait.
front row.
But if there was any additional information on what we're seeing with that trend.
Yes, Shireen Carver, Executive Director of Special Services. First, I want to thank the board for your advocacy on behalf of special education and behalf of our neurodiverse students. So thank you for that first. Yes, we are seeing some different trends. And so we're seeing students with more complex needs requiring more complex services. So our neurodiverse students now becoming eligible for special education services. And we're seeing that trend consistently across our earliest learners through our oldest learners.
All right, thank you. All right, anything else? Any other questions, comments? Okay, if not, then this item will come back before the board at our next board meeting, and that's when the board will take action related to the budget to put it into place for the 23-24 school year. All right, thank you both for all of the information in the presentation. All right, we are now on to works in progress. Superintendent, tell us. The new school year is almost here.
Great, thank you. Well, yes, it's been a very, there's some quiet times that happen in July for the district and for our families as people reset, right, for the next school year. But we have been very busy the past few weeks in preparing to go back to school, and what that will continue as we actually start school and start our September timeframe. So in terms of getting ready behind the scenes, I'm going to start with our operations teams. We've been very busy completing summer work and preparing buildings for the arrival of our students and staff this fall and this August. And that includes painting parking lots, completing work while schools are less full, and conducting and doing deep cleaning. Our transportation team is busy preparing routes for the fall, and our food service department is finalizing our menus and preparing for our inventory needs by ordering food. And then in general, we are working across all of our school district to hire to bring the right people that we need to have in all of our positions. And that is happening fast and furiously. We've had several job fairs. Well, one in particular brought in more than 70 applicants. That was yesterday for our paraprofessional and for driver positions. We have, I believe, less than 10 classroom positions open right now. So we are in a strong spot. I think overall we've hired maybe close to 240 new employees to date. So our human resources team has been very busy, and kudos to the team and the hiring managers who extend beyond the human resources team, who are very active in making sure that we get the right people in seats here. In addition, on our finance team, we are making sure that our processes are more streamlined, and we're continuing to innovate along that line. And for example, our accounting department is implementing a new materials and reimbursement accounts payable process. And we'll have new training to help ourselves digitize, automate, and increase some of our own internal controls as one example. And I do want to share with the board at this time that we have heard back from the auditor about the timeline of the audit process, which we've discussed in prior board meetings. But in particular for the financial single audit, we are hoping to, well, they have let us know that they plan to complete that by the end of the month. And so our team expects the audit report will be released sometime in September. I would say early September to mid-September, according to that timeline that we can expect that, which means we can bring forward executive limitations, both 1 and 5, potentially for the end of September at the earliest. So that's all the work behind the scenes, but also the audit's an important part of how we wrap up the prior school year and prepare simultaneously for the audit for the moving forward. It's a continuous cycle of audit review for us right now. On the school side, all of our levels, elementary, middle, and high school, have held sectionals and or will be launching sectionals work this week. During these meetings, our district staff talk about the work that we're doing collectively to support our student staff and school leaders throughout the year. In particular, our principals are preparing for their August professional development days and welcoming their teams back to campuses. Our offices are open. We're welcoming families. And as Mr. Turney said, we are in the process of the enrollment verification process, or EVP for short. So as a reminder, if you have not yet completed that, as someone listening to our board meeting, please make sure you complete that to ensure that your student is ready to go for this school year. We are also conducting tours in our buildings for new families in partnership to drive registration. And then this is a big transition year for those kids coming in at the kindergarten level. So we do have a staggered start for our kindergartners. And so we're preparing for the family connection meetings that occur the first few days after the rest of the students come back to campus. Other instructional work that we're doing to prepare for this school year include an annual special services workshop, which will welcome our special services staff back for the 23 to 24 school year. This year, staff will be participating in a different conference style workshop, which will be focused on academic and procedural excellence. We have a new hire orientation for our certificated staff planned and ready to go in the coming weeks. We have a focus on our district-wide literacy training with Carrie Yates, who is the author of Shifting the Balance. Additional work on literacy will be to focus on incorporating expanding really great reading based on teacher feedback and a pilot from 22 to 23. At the secondary level, we have some new instructional materials launching and course design for 6th grade math, in particular focusing on Algebra 1 intervention and middle school study skills. And we have a cross-district content collaboration time at the secondary level for middle school day slated for August 24th. And then for Ed Tech, which is another component of our preparing for the instructional side of our work, is launching additional district-wide tech PD and updating our Canvas teacher website. A couple more things to share in our activities for back to school. In our efforts to continue to always improve and enhance our communications work, we are going to be launching a new distribution channel that focuses on our internal communications called the ISD Insider. And we do need to With all the emails that come out from across the district, we want to focus on the experience of our staff as a user and streamline the information. And so we'll be coordinating our efforts across the departments to be able to provide inside information that is applicable to the insiders of the Issaquah School District. So great work by the communications team to both create the name and sort of that effort, and to help coordinate across our teams to bring that seamless experience to our staff and to provide regular communication and information across the district. Our all administrators are meeting for some extended time this week for 2 full days. The focus of that is going to be on relationship building and connections and cohesion, making sure that we have consistent delivery of information so that departments can work together in support of our staff seamlessly. And we'll be building some capacity in our routines to implement the strategic plan at all levels. We'll be growing our knowledge, awareness, skills, and advocacy for racial equity, and overall creating greater cohesion as we advance our work collectively for best practices for teaching and learning. Our cabinet's been meeting prior to that to also prepare. And so we've been focusing on advancing our work in strategic planning, supporting the work of our monitoring reports for executive limitations and our ends for the board, and making sure that we are investing in ourselves to continue to build our own connections as we foster team culture and collaboration for ourselves and across the district. And we're also welcoming our new school board representatives very soon. So this week, as part of our back to school planning, we have some time set up with directors Moraldo and Weaver to plan for the welcoming and training for the next group of representatives to the board. And that's just a snapshot. So there's much more, and it is busy, and we will continue to march forward to open school very successfully.
My goodness, that's a lot that's been going on, getting ready for the school year. That's great. Great. I know, and all that hiring has made great progress. I know always one of the big questions is, have they got enough bus drivers? So hopefully we're doing well on the bus drivers. Yeah. Okay. I'm seeing good thumbs up, because that's always one of the big ones, because those bus drivers and buses that transport our kids to school, they're the first people that see our kids every morning when on their way to school. So it's a great way to start their day. All right. Anybody have any questions for her? Nope. All right. Well, thank you very much for that update. Appreciate it. It sounds like a lot of good things for the start of school. All right. We are on to the capital projects update. Let's see. Mr. Mullins coming up and getting ready.
Good evening, everyone. Tom Mullins, Director of Capital Projects. As a couple board meetings ago, we did an update on the Issaquah High School Stadium and the various projects that are the various portions of that project that are going on. As you know, they were going to, we're going to provide an update to the board related to all these different parts of the project. The various parts, there's 4 of them. We had the athletic field turf replacement, which is underway and actually complete. The track replacement, where they went in and not only did the surface of the track, but redid the rubber underneath. That project is complete. The stadium light replacement project is underway and going well. We're expecting to be done the 3rd week of August and ready for the September 1st date that we had promised. And the sound system upgrades. There was some issues discovered with the sound system at the stadium. We've done a study, found out what they are, and they are underway also. They're waiting for some last minute parts, and they're expected to be ready for the September 1st date also. Just a couple pictures, show you the new track and field, looking sharp, clean. We had a little, he's been there, I shouldn't say he, I should probably say she's been there a long time. I mistakenly might have named it a heron. It could be a osprey. And we have a wildlife biologist going out on Thursday to make recommendations and confirm that the plan we have in place is indeed what would be done. That's pole over there is the one of the existing light poles, which they've nicely put their nest on top of. What will happen in November, we'll leave that pole up. That pole will always stay. The other 7 are coming out, the other 7 wood poles, and being replaced by 4 new metal poles. They'll come back in November when the bird is gone and remove the lights, add a platform on that will project to the backside of the pole away from the track. And the question now is, do we put the nest onto that platform, or do we let them rebuild? And what we want to do is coax them to come back to that location, because if not, he or she will find one of the other poles to do it on. And we'd like to keep them as far away from the track as possible. So that is what the wildlife biologist is going to give us a recommendation on how to proceed with that. But more to come on that one.
Did you tell the heron there wasn't any budget for a replacement facility?
And he was upset because I called him a heron. It was an osprey. So I got out of the gate wrong there. No. It'll be interesting. They make quite a mess on the track and on the field or wherever they're near.
Wasn't there something Dr. Gallinger was saying? We have birds at Pine Lake that were causing us trouble?
Yep, Pine Lake and I know Skyline, 2 different locations at Skyline, one on the community use field, and those poles, that light pole is right kind of out it has turf all the way around it. It's probably a 30-foot circumference of twigs and branches and other debris. So they have fun. So. Next step's going to finish up the projects. I've been emailing with the IHS Stadium community and keeping them up to date. I've gotten good feedback, a couple thank yous, and to the board for their following through with making sure the stadium is in line with the other stadiums in the best way we can. And we're going to, once we get into fall sports, I'm going to put out and solicit feedback and see if there's a need for another in-person listening session and make sure we've addressed as many of the things as we can with those folks over there and their concerns.
All right, great, thank you. Oh, right, your chart, one
Yeah,
more, right?
Sydney's not here for
Yeah,
that, but
Sydney's not here
yeah,
for it, but we
so
like
missed
it.
it. But we're on track. And any questions?
Yeah, any questions? No, that looks great. I'm
Yeah.
glad you're on track and gonna make it by the end of August and ready for the beginning of the fall sports
Yep.
season.
Exactly.
For the use and for our students.
Perfect.
All right. Well,
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you for that update.
I just want to take a moment to thank Tom Mullins for his work to not only work with our Issaquah High School community, but also there's other navigation of entities that help provide and pave the way for our time. So in particular, also working with our city of Issaquah and other entities to make sure that everything got coordinated. And I know you have a whole team to help with that as well, but thank you very, very much.
Thank you. All right. Next up is the first read of revisions to 2 of our GPs. This was actually one that I had asked us to take a look at doing as we were going through our budget development guidelines. I was kind of looking at it and realizing nowhere in our policies do we actually say we need to do this. We have just always done it. So I had asked the board if we could make revisions to make it explicit in our policies to ensure that we always do this. And so attached are revisions to GP3 and GP4. For GP3, we would add an item that indicates the board will, and it will be annually develop and adopt district budget development guidelines. So that would be the only change, and it would become number 4 and shift the rest down is the only change we were making. And then for GP4, Similarly, it's in the addition of one line under the accordingly section where it says the cycle will start with the board's development of its agenda for the next year, and the planning calendar will include, we're adding number 4, adoption of budget development guidelines. So this would ensure that it is a responsibility of the board through GP3, and then at GP4, that it gets added to the agenda planning for the year, like when we do our ELs and ends monitoring. Director Weaver.
Well, okay, so that's the only change to
Yes.
GP4. Okay, because mine has some weird blue
I think that's format.
deletion. No, it's like, it's a deleting gifts and adoptions, which I don't think we need to do because
Oh.
gifts are on the consent agenda. So I was wondering,
Oh, no,
that's,
that wasn't
that's
in
something glitchy. That's not
I
something
think
you
so.
need
That
to
wasn't
do.
my intention in the version I thought I sent, but that might have somehow gotten in there. But the two statements that I read are the only changes, but I'll
Okay,
take a
well,
look
I'm
at that.
fine
Yep.
with that then.
So this,
I do have the same thing where it's.
yeah, I didn't
highlighted
even notice
blue,
it
which
because
is
I had
different.
already sent it.
Yeah.
But I'll take a look at that and we'll clean that up for when it would come back. So I take any feedback. I had passed this by Director Moraldo because she was helping me with this. It's very simple and straightforward, but then what we
We
would do.
spent 3 hours discussing the
Yeah,
word
that-
changes. Just
So then what we would do at our next board meeting, this would be on the agenda to just take board action on.
So,
Director Moraldo?
it is very simple wording change, but I think it's actually very meaningful additions. And I was at the WASDA board meeting this past weekend, and we talked about some things there where the executive director was bringing some things that he was wanting to possibly add to the budget. And I'm like, but we don't have a budget development guideline that we do. So that's completely in your wheelhouse. And so I think it actually helps us build a better relationship with the superintendent by saying, we're going to set some budget development guidelines. So when she and her staff go off to do their budget development, they've already heard from the board rather than doing a ton of work and then getting criticism from the board. So it's actually a relationship builder and a partnership builder. So I really appreciate it. It's actually a very meaningful addition, even though it's just a few words.
Well, it's actually also been our practice
It has
for,
been.
I don't know
all
how
of our
many
years.
years, all the years, I think.
Mhm.
We've done that for as long as I can remember. So it is time that we actually recognized it in policy.
Right. It's an opportunity to have our policy match what we really do because it's a good thing we do. And so we want to make sure that it's always done. And this way, by putting it in our policy, it better ensures the board, whatever board is up here will always do it.
Well, and that's what I was about
Yeah.
to say is I really appreciate that we are doing this. And I know it wasn't that long ago that we went through the board job description and
Mhm.
added a number of things that, again, we always do, but they should be in there because pretty soon we're going to have new board members who aren't going to know that we've always done it that way. And this gives them a much firmer foundation to get started on. So
And that's my only beef with it. It is yet another reminder that my
It's
colleagues
gonna
here are
happen.
not going to be here. I'm
That's-
excited about the
That's true.
potential people who will be sitting in these seats, but
It'll be an opportunity.
a lot of knowledge will be walking out the door. So I'm glad we're codifying some of it.
we're walking out the door, we're not dying. You can still find us.
All right, before we leave this item, I'll just ask if there's any public comment related to our updates to the GP in the room or on Zoom. All right, so if not, then did you have anything?
Well, one is an appreciation. You talked about codifying practice and good practice, and we appreciate that. I appreciate that from the perspective of just being able to engage and have that be explicit. So it's great, and it's a good tool and guideline for us. The one note that I just thought about was there's a difference in how it's stated. So under GP4, it says budget development guidelines, but on GP3, it's referred to as
Oh,
district budget development guidelines, which I believe it's just budget development guidelines. So I don't know if you wanted to make that consistent.
Yeah, we'll clean that up.
And that was just, it only came to my brain as we were thinking,
As I
hearing you
said
talk
it.
about it. Yeah.
Okay, Yeah, I can take a look at that. I think that's minor enough that we can just still bring it back for our second read and at the next one. and
Yeah, because I
have-
don't think it changes the meaning. It's
doesn't.
Just
It's-
cleaning up the language.
Let's always have a consistent reference to it. And I'll also take a look at the document that we do create and see which way we say it on that one, because that's what we want to match, whatever way we want to go. All right. All right, that takes care of that item, and we are on to legislation. I know Director Gallinger isn't here and nothing got sent to me. I don't know, Director Moraldo, if you have anything you wanted to comment on?
Actually, I did. I am on the, what is it? The Gifted Advisory Board, highly capable and gifted advisory board with OSPI. And there were changes that included universal screening. And so that's going to require a change to the WACs. And so so those are getting opened up and there are changes being made by the advisory committee. We don't have a draft. We're meeting this coming week or sometime this week, hopefully, or next week, to talk about kind of the draft of those changes. And then they'll be put out and I'll want you all to take a look at them as well. What is interesting is they're actually looking to get rid of the term highly capable or most highly capable and change it to students requiring accelerated or advanced instruction. So I actually think that's a great change. I don't know what it means for how you would actually determine then who qualifies, because it's a very different thing to say that this student requires accelerated and or advanced instruction versus most highly capable, which was really, so I think it might be interesting to see how we interpret that. So, and I'll forward that off because I'm sure that Superintendent Taliak, you're going to want your team to evaluate how that impacts at all levels of education.
All right, thank you.
That's actually a really interesting change because highly capable is just descriptive. Oh, this kid is really capable. But students requiring accelerated instruction, that shifts the onus to the district. It's not just, oh, look, there's a highly capable kid. It's what are you going to do about it? And I mean, I realize that's really simplistic. Obviously, we've always tried to provide that sort of instruction to highly capable students. But it is an interesting shift in the way you reference that.
Well, and it's a difference as well between a student that's highly capable and one that's an advanced learner.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, it is a
This-
difference. It is a difference.
There's a difference. And so we'd have to see better where they're going with this.
I presume
Well-
there will be additional verbiage to explain what they mean.
I'm hoping to hear more, but I have often said, and I say it in those meetings as well with my colleagues on the advisory committee, that Washington State and really kind of countrywide, we have a highly productive system, not a highly capable program, right? So it's about students who are highly
Yeah.
productive. And so how do we get to the point where this student, whether, especially if they're what they call twice special. So if they're on an IEP or a 5014 and they need accelerated or advanced instruction, how do you best meet their need? How do they get qualified? Because they actually may not be very productive. I know, I had one. And so I think it actually broadens the scope of who it is. And I like the language change that is not about, we're identifying something about your student, right? We're giving a tag to your student. Instead, it is very much like you said, it's actually an identifier for us that we have requirements that we need to meet to best meet the needs of that student. And so it's, I think it's great language change, and I'm excited to hear from my colleagues how they actually came up with that. And so it's interesting, when you open up the WAC for changes, you can change pretty much anything. So I just don't know if they've thought about the financial costs that might incur to districts.
What is the timing of the actions that they're taking?
So I think we're trying to come up with a draft that can go out to the public probably by the end of the month, but I don't know how long the comment period is. I don't know if it's similar to the federal government that usually has like a 30-day or 45-day comment period. If anyone else that has on staff that deals with WAC changes might know. So that's more information that I'll get hopefully in the next meeting is how long of a comment period do we have? And so hopefully, I'm also working with the Washington State School Directors Association to make sure it gets out to all school directors, because I think we just have a different perspective that we're going to be able to want to talk about.
Okay, thank you. Great. All right, any other announcements or correspondence to be mentioned? Okay, if not, we are on to calendar and future agenda items. I know the board is working on its Board of Distinction application. I think Director Mullings had asked us to start working on parts of it. I think it's due September 15th, if anybody, it's just a work in progress.
I know one team that's going to be done, I bet you, in short order.
We're working
Hey.
on it.
Well, that's good. Maybe we can get the whole thing done well in advance.
I should also mention while we're talking about WASDA things, that we got approval for the breakout session that we proposed on leveraging community engagement in a superintendent search. So I have to shoot a couple of things back to WASDA, like, yes, we want to do it. And although I put down all of our names, I think it's basically something you and I get to do because you have all the calendars. But you can do your September thing first and
Well,
we'll
we'll
work on
we
it
will
in
get this
October.
done.
We'll be fine.
We will.
But I think I think it's nice that they accepted it. I'm looking forward to going to our last WASDA conference, but at least I'll have a reason to be there.
That's right. We have a
So,
job to do.
We have a job to do.
We
So
will.
I think it'll be fun and I think it'll be a good session.
Great. Yes, we have that. Okay, we're working on our Board of Distinction. And then Superintendent, I think you wanted to discuss some dates or thinking around changes to the school improvement plan. So I'll let you share some thinking there.
Yes, so we, our team would like to propose moving school improvement plan meetings for this school year earlier in the year for two reasons. One is we are mid-cycle in the current plan, so this would be a sort of mid-cycle check-in, which would allow us to focus on data and action planning and what adjustments to the action plans would be part of what's informed by the data, but also taking from the last conversation with school improvement plans in the spring. Combined with, I hear a lot of conversation around, well, it's, how are we always looking in arrears? We'd like to look forward a little bit more and use that discussion to be able to bring forward changes and or set the stage for those changes in an earlier manner. So our ideal would be to move those dates from the spring to the fall, and wanted to discuss with the board if there was openness to that or any history we could go back to that would inform why we were doing it in the spring, engage in that discussion, in which case that would then set the stage for, actual scheduling the school improvement plans, which we have not yet done for the year anyways.
I think the only reason it was in January to give staff time to get results back regarding the testing and to be able to incorporate that into their plan. And likely that beginning of the year stuff is so overwhelming that would give them enough time to have the discussions they have to have their plan ready. So if their plan is ready earlier, then I don't think there's anything really keeping the board from doing.
Yeah, I think the calendaring of it was always, I don't think it was at the request of the board. I think it was the time that worked for the administration for whatever reason. And you threw out a couple of good ones. So if you want to move it forward, I don't see a problem from the board's perspective, other than, as Director Moore mentioned earlier, actually calendaring.
Yeah, I don't think there'd be any objection as far as the board wouldn't want it. So if you and staff can have it ready, and that makes a lot more sense because it's nearer term, especially to when we're getting the data, that would seem better. So then it would just be a matter of trying to move towards finding the dates that would allow this to work.
Yeah, and we know that September is a difficult month because it's only also coming up very quickly. So we can put together some dates and some proposals for that.
Mhm.
taking into account, our different, building, school calendars and
Right.
schedules.
All right, well, that lets you give it a go if that seems right, and we'll see how it works out for this year. But certainly for thinking ahead to the next year would make it easier because we'll be able to schedule it more in advance.
Yes, and then one thing that has changed is that we have more, mid-year data to use.
Mhm.
And so, instead of waiting for state test scores to be released, on an annual basis, we have more ready data at our hands to give us an indicator of how our progress is. So that's very helpful.
Great, that all the better. Yeah, it lets us be much more forward looking when we can do that. All right, and unless there is anything else that needs to be brought up? Nope. All right, then we are